innovation management is a broader discipline of how do we help large, complex organizations become and stay innovative when that's kind of fighting against the grain of what they're naturally designed to do. Big machines are designed to do one thing really well, not, continuously come up with new things. That's what startups do. And so we help organizations like ours, the people in the broader innovation discipline, help large organizations innovate and stay innovative.
Welcome to Everyday Innovation, your go-to podcast for enhancing your creative and entrepreneurial process. I'm Jordan DeVecchia, a multi-passionate creator entrepreneur, venture studio co-founder, and business designer and advisor. Here we live at the intersection of creativity, strategy, and personal development. Join me for inspiring conversations, actionable practices, and insight infusions designed to shift your mindset and empower you with tools and resources to create impactful ventures. Get ready to take your ideas to the next level and innovate with purpose.
Welcome back to the Everyday Innovation podcast. Today I have Nick Jain, the CEO of Ideascale, an innovation management platform, and Nick, who is naturally an innovation management leader with a diverse and nonlinear background in several industries. Armed with a STEM background, a Harvard MBA, and experience at McKinsey and Bain Capital, Nick has successfully led and transformed companies, bringing a unique approach to driving both personal and systemic innovation. So Nick, are you ready for a couple of warm-up questions to get us going?
I am, and thank you for the very kind intro.
Of course. We're so excited to learn from you. So what are you reading or learning right now? I know as leaders, we always want to be doing our personal development journey. So I don't know if there's something that you're reading right now that you love or something that you're learning a little bit more about to help you in your role.
So yeah, I've got a great answer to that. So I'm actually a big believer in continuing education. So I'm doing three things right now. Number one, I'm reading a fantasy novel called Leorn, which is your typical junk fantasy novel. Love, but that's just for passion. Number two, I'm reading a technical book on the technical underpinnings of the internet. And then number three, I'm actually taking a formal course on algorithms on Coursera.
Oh my gosh, I love Coursera. Is there a favorite that you've taken or one that you really recommend?
A really cool one recently that I just completed a few weeks ago is prompt engineering for ChatGPT, because now that's become such a major tool nowadays, and I wanted to get really good at it rather than being an amateur. So I actually took a series of 3 courses from Vanderbilt University via Coursera. Highly recommend all 3 courses.
And what was is there like a particular prompt that you wouldn't have thought of? There's something that was really useful in your work?
Yes, there is. There's something called the persona pattern, which is when you tell ChatGPT, like, act like a world-class marketing manager or act like a CEO or act like a 5-year-old. And just those 4 or 5 words, act like XYZ, gives it so much information that you would otherwise have to spend paragraphs explaining to it how to act like a 5-year-old or a marketing manager. So that's such a powerful prompt because you can literally tell it, hey, act like a world-class marketing manager, and then give it prompts on things like you might want to develop as a marketing campaign for your company.
That absolutely makes sense. And using that for like your ideal client profile is great if you're trying to like also see the response that you might get, which is really, really, really fun. So that's awesome. I actually have a fun card draw question. I pre-selected a few, but we're going to make this a little bit spontaneous. So I'm just going to kind of do this. Okay, let's see what we got here. Oh, okay. So this kind of leads into what we're talking about and also what we've just been talking about. But do you have like a practice for staying curious?
I don't have a practice. I'm just a naturally curious person. I'm a bit of a nerd. I love learning. So I don't have a practice. It kind of comes innately.
I'm the same way. I just am naturally curious and I'm naturally nosy in that sense too. So it's like when I see something that I'm really interested in, I just kind of dive in, which is why I'm really excited to talk to you because I'm really interested in getting into your background. I know that you started from pretty humble beginnings. I know that you had mentioned that to me. You've accomplished such amazing things, but you are also somebody who's immigrated here and also somebody who's lived in different countries. So I want to hear a little bit about that story and maybe how that kind of had this sort of genesis of the importance of maybe ideas and vision and innovation.
Sure. So I have a kind of unusual immigrant story. My parents emigrated to Canada in the 1980s, and as core immigrants who literally, it's the classic story, $5 in your pocket and the shirt on your back type of situation, they couldn't afford to take care of a child. So right after my birth, they actually sent me to live with my grandmother in India. So my parents actually did not really meet me till I was about 5 or 6 years old. And my first memory of my mother is when I'm 5 years old and she came to pick me up in India to, put me in kindergarten back in Canada. Big shout out to my parents. That's a tremendous sacrifice to give up your newborn child And it's a sacrifice they made so they could, create a lot of opportunity for me. And also shout out to my grandmother, who as a single grandmother raised myself and my younger brother, on the literally the other side of the world with a very weak support system. Back then in India in the 1980s, you had running water maybe 2 hours a day. Electricity was on and off. So quite a different circumstance than, somebody growing up today, both in India as well as definitely the United States.
So do you have some early memories of that transition of going from India to Canada with your known but also kind of new parents?
So I've got a bit of a funny anecdote. The preschool I was attending in India was called Wendy's. So I remember I get dropped off in Vancouver airport. My mother's driving me back to our, the home where she and my father are living. And I see a sign for Wendy's out there. Obviously, Wendy's, the fast food restaurant. And I ask my mom, and it looks so cute. There's this, redheaded girl. It looks like a school. And I remember asking my mother in Hindi back then, not English, hey, is that where I'm going to be going to school? Which, it's kind of amusing at this time where you think you're going to school in a fast food restaurant. But it was just, as a 5-year-old, Wendy's was where I went to preschool in India.
Oh my gosh, I love that story. It's amazing because it's like you're taking you're taking those innocent like childhood moments and the love that you probably had for your school and for your grandma. And you're like, how can I translate here to this new place? What was that kind of culture difference when you're coming from India?
I don't think quite the resource differences registered themselves, because in India, at that time, you were just kind of used to, hey, you get water for an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, and that's the world. And then when you move here, 24-hour water, it's not, at least to my child mind, it didn't make a difference. Nowadays, when I go between United States, India, Canada, other countries, you definitely notice differences in, how wide the streets are, how much water accessibility there is. But I certainly didn't as a child. I think the biggest difference was, A, losing the friends you grew up with as a child, and then B, having to really quickly learn a new language. Because when I immigrated to Canada, I had something like 4 months to learn to be functional in English to go to kindergarten. And that was kind of the biggest challenge and new experience for me as an immigrant then.
Yeah. And so did you have tutors? Because clearly you were moving towards a very successful academic career. So I'm curious as to how they prepped you for that.
Sure. So my father still to this day speaks quite broken English, but my mother had the good fortune of having a great English language education when she was growing up. So her English is impeccable. And so she actually taught me English in like the 3 or 4 months before we started kindergarten, or before I started kindergarten. She would read to me every day from a variety of books, like children's books, like See Spot Run level, to like classic English poetry. So I got, bombarded with a lot of language and her spending immense amounts of hours investing to make sure that I was prepared and I would not show up ineffectual in kindergarten.
That's incredible. And so you go into school, you're learning all of your new things. You start to decide on like, I'm sort of starting to get interested in certain topics. I know you really got into the sciences early on. So was that something that showed up early, or were you just kind of master of all trades and then you just got into science in college? I'm curious to see, because sometimes I see patterns from when people are young, or sometimes I'm just trying a lot of different things.
For me, it was quite young. I don't know exactly how I got it into my head that I wanted to be a scientist, but I remember very distinctly in second grade, they wanted you to draw what you wanted to be when you grew up. And a lot of people are drawing police officers or nurses or firemen or teachers, right? And I very clearly remember drawing myself in a lab coat saying, I want to be a scientist. So science has always been a passion of mine. I actually did take a ton of courses in the humanities and English literature and stuff throughout, but I knew professionally that I wanted to go into the hard sciences from the age of like 6 or 7.
I love that, because I wanted to ask, because I almost had a feeling that you would have a story about drawing yourself in a lab coat. There was some intuition there, which is amazing, because I see that. I do think, especially even if it's not something that you stick with in the same way that you may have imagined, you still take that sort of mindset into what you're working on. You got into school, you're a scientist. I know you wrote this, you're kind of like a scientist by trade. So what kind of sciences did you study? And, what was more of your focus? Was it something, were you doing local sciences? Was there something that you really focused on in your studies that you really enjoyed or resonated with?
Sure. So my degree was in mathematics and physics, but
Okay.
specifically the areas that I was focusing on in college was in abstract mathematics and physics. So if you've ever seen Beautiful Mind or
Mhm.
Goodwill Hunting, yeah, the very straight, kind of strange, esoteric, theoretical math.
Meta
That's the
math.
type of stuff that I was studying. Very loved it because the really cool thing about that sort of math is it teaches you really, really fundamental truths about the universe that you sometimes may go through life just assuming to be true. Why do numbers exist, right? That's a very,
Right.
we've just always been taught, hey, 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4. You just take that as true. And then imagine having to figure that out and say, hey, that's true, even if you're sitting on Pluto or even if you're living in a
Right.
mirror universe. It teaches you to be incredibly logical and methodical about your reasoning. And so that's what I really loved about it. And it teaches you how to think about the universe like that too.
And so were you getting into like a lot of quantum physics too? A
So
lot of
all
that,
the
which is
strange
really
math that they
cool.
ever name drop in movies as like the really weird stuff, I was definitely doing that both on the math side and the physics side.
I love that because it gets almost into, you almost are touching into the metaphysical realm, but you have a lot of like evidence-based stuff, which is really cool because you're sitting at this really, you have almost like the creativity, you're almost tapping into aspects of the brain. Like I feel like there's all these intersections and even computing too. So you got into what I like to call it almost like meta math, the meta study of everything, which is kind of, really interesting when you're talking about this nonlinear career and also you're getting into innovation. I feel like you almost have to get into that meta space, which is it's meta, but it's also atomic at the same time. You're looking at kind of these bigger pictures, these bigger patterns. And then also looking at like you were saying, like the fundamental truths. So it's a really interesting perspective that you've gained there. And then so next you went into more of the consulting space. How did that happen? Where you kind of were in math and sciences, and then you went more into the consulting space.
Sure. So during college, I spent some time doing some research in physics fields, and I realized, hey, I love the mathematics aspect of it. I love the intellectual aspect of it, but I'm an extrovert. I want to be around people and work in teams. And so as I considered what my strengths are as a person, what I really enjoy doing in life, I'm like, hey, good at math, I'm competitive, and I like working with people. And that kind of the Venn diagram of those three characteristics lead people very quickly onto Wall Street as a professional investor.
Right.
And so consult like the way investing on Wall Street works is you typically spend 2 or 3 years doing consulting or investment
Mhm.
banking and then moving to an investing role. So consulting was an opportunity for me to learn a bunch of different industries, learn how businesses actually work because I had no formal business training, and then transition that eventually into an investing role, which is where I spent the next 10 years of my career.
So your goal was not just working in the consulting, but getting into more of the investing side. So what was your goal in investment? Were you wanting to work with a lot of portfolio companies and work on different projects? Were you looking more so at I like to do the financial analysis piece or M&A? Like what was your goal kind of getting into the
Sure.
investment side?
So I wanted to invest in companies, right? I
Right.
wasn't sure whether I wanted to invest in the stock market and private equity. I didn't even know what those terms meant, back when I was entering the field. But I
Yeah.
knew I wanted to invest in companies. So there were two aspects I liked about it that I knew ex ante. The first was investing requires you to really deeply understand what you're investing in, right? Whether you're investing in Microsoft or a tiny fish startup or a men's shoe company, you have to really understand what it is the business does, how they make money, who their customers, really understand it at a deep, deep
Mhm.
level. And number two is there's an aspect of risk management. So whenever you make a decision in life, there's some probability you could be wrong. When you're crossing the street, you may look both ways, but you may have missed out that one bike coming down, that one car, and you have to account for that risk. And investing really in good investors are not only good at understanding the specific investments that they are looking at, but then assessing the risk of that investment in the context of their broader portfolio or decisions that they're making. And I really like both of those aspects. It's very analytical, forces you to be very thoughtful, but also cognizant of where you may be incorrect.
Right, exactly. And then you also get to develop your own process, your own decision-making process, your own way of and lens of de-risking or making risk assessments and your own style too. So there is like an element of creativity, but then you have the analytics behind it. So you can kind of show what your philosophy is and develop that philosophy in a way that you would like a scientist, scientific method and testing and retesting, right? And I know you've worked in a nonlinear fashion. So tell me about these other experiences that you had where you were working in different industries, because I love seeing the threads, because you not only did that in consulting, you also did that in leadership positions as well.
Yeah. So somewhere around 4 or 5 years ago, just, in the middle of COVID, I got a random call saying, "Hey, Nick, would you like the opportunity to co-run a $100 million revenue trucking business?" So in my late 20s at that point, I've never really, worked in a real company. Finance and consulting firms are really interesting. You learn a lot of things, but they're very different than if you work at a company that manufactures Kleenexes or sells software, like real operating companies, the things that you and I interact with on a day-to-day basis. And this was it really caught my eye for two reasons. Number one, it's obviously a tremendous career opportunity to be a reasonably young individual and get the opportunity to run, a 500 or 1,000 person company. And number two, as I looked at the company, I was like, I can actually make a big difference here. I see opportunities where the things that I'm good at, thinking very analytically, thinking in terms of processes, are very good at this in this organization that has been less effective at those. So I got an opportunity to co-run this trucking company called Fusion Transport. And then that actually had basically resulted in me somehow becoming a serial CEO for so I got hired then after I left Fusion. I got hired to do help co-run a small men's shoe startup. And then for the past 2 or 3 years now, I have been the CEO of Ideascale, which is an entirely different industry than trucking or shoes. It is in business to business software. So we sell very large, complicated cloud software to huge organizations around the world.
In each of these areas, what is something that you really, really enjoyed from the operating side? Was it looking into the financials? Was it looking into better distribution? Was there a particular function that you really enjoyed in your role?
So yes, and it goes back to what I was saying about the first part of investing, that you have to really deeply understand what it is your investment or company does. So the thing of it is, I look through, trucking, men's shoes, and now software. The thing that I've most enjoyed about all of these is understanding how each of those businesses works and then using that for effective decision making. So for example, at Ideascale, decisions are not made based on what the CEO says or what the head of sales says. There's a consistent a return on investment framework that this is how a software business should operate. Does the decision match that framework and that math? If it doesn't, we don't do it. It doesn't matter if the idea is mine as CEO or a junior person's. If it's a bad idea in a analytical framework, it doesn't get done. And if it's a good idea, it doesn't matter if it's week one on your job on the job. If you have a good idea and it's the right decision for the company, we do it.
Yes. And if you're thinking of books like Principles, where you have a lot of that kind of leadership in companies where you have these frameworks and kind of these things outside of just management decisions, you have something that people can look to culturally too, to say like, this is how we do things. And it creates that consistency in decision making. It creates accountability, I think, too, so that people can feel comfortable in the company-wide decisions that are being made, as opposed to it being, obviously there's all from leadership, you have to make hard decisions at any given time, and somebody has to be the point person. But having those frameworks in place is incredible. And I know that you're also giving that to, you were saying, I mean, it's B2B SaaS. You're giving that to companies as well as innovation management. So tell me a little bit more about, what is innovation management? How do you manage innovation?
Hear about startups, right? Startups are trying to do something new and cool. They're by definition innovative, whether they're creating a new type of shoe, whether they're creating a new type of software, new medical drugs. Startups are innovative. But then let's look at large organizations. Let's consider the US Post Office or the Army or Pfizer or Microsoft, like these large, or General Mills, right? The cereal company. These are large, complex organizations. And large, complex organizations are really effectively designed to do one thing well. General Mills is really well designed to make cereal and sell cereal. Microsoft is designed to make software and sell software. They get very efficient at the processing or process element of whatever that organization set up to do. They're therefore not inherently as innovative as, let's say, a small startup. And so what innovation management is, a broader discipline of how do we help large, complex organizations become and stay innovative when that's kind of fighting against the grain of what they're naturally designed to do. Big machines are designed to do one thing really well, not, continuously come up with new things. That's what startups do. And so we help organizations like ours, the people in the broader innovation discipline, help large organizations innovate and stay innovative.
Right. Exactly. I'm currently working in a venture studio, and it's in that same sort of realm of helping either, depending on who you're working with, but different types of founders or different types of companies work on their innovation process and help kickstart that. So your software is actually, in essence, helping them cultivate that. So do they typically have a special team that they work with that is working on your software? Is it their existing team that's working with the software to generate these ideas and manage them? Who is usually using the software at the company?
Sure. So I'll answer broadly, and then I'll answer specifically to our software. Perfect. I think different organizations have approached the innovation problem differently. A lot of organizations now have started to create chief innovation officer roles where, you have your CEO, your CFO, your chief marketing officer, your chief sales officer, and a lot of organizations started realizing that, hey, we actually need someone to manage innovation. They started creating chief innovation officer roles that sits in the boardroom alongside the CEO and other senior staffers. For organizations like that, that's great because they've created a chief innovation officer. They've allocated him or her the team and resources to pursue innovation. And obviously, organizations like mine as well, as, there's software providers, there's consulting providers on innovation. That's a great audience for us to go to. For other organizations, they either may feel that they don't need a dedicated innovation officer, or they just lack the resource, right? Having an innovation department is expensive and it may not be the right fit for everyone. In that case, companies like Ideascale typically work with the human resource department, the IT departments, or the R&D department. So in a pharmaceutical company, let's say like a Pfizer or Merck, some of those companies don't actually have chief innovation departments, but guess what? Pfizer knows that they need to be doing R&D constantly. So organizations like mine will love to work with their R&D departments because that's very tightly aligns with our mission as an organization.
So in the actual software itself, I saw that there is like a whiteboard. So is that kind of like Miro where there is that sharing of ideas? What are some of the components that they're using in this process?
Sure. So our company right now, Ideascale, offers two different modules. One is a whiteboarding piece of software similar to a Mural or Figma that allows you just to unstructured thinking with individuals. With anybody. So you can be, drawing doodles, sticking in boxes, all sorts of fancy whiteboarding features. More or less the idea is anything that you could do on a physical whiteboard, you should be able to do on a digital whiteboard in an unstructured way. That's our newest module, which came out about 6 months ago. Our core module, which we're most known for, is called an idea management solution. And it's this notion that, hey, your organization may have many, many great ideas floating around. Some may be coming from the janitor who's sitting in a warehouse somewhere far away. Some may be coming from the CEO. Some may be coming from the middle of a marketer. How do you get all those ideas in the same place without needing to go right up to the CEO and meet him or her? Because that's pretty rare that you get to go hang out with the CEO of a company, right? Right. So our solution, our core idea management solution, helps large organizations collect all of those ideas from their people. And those ideas could be organized into marketing, risk operations, risk new drugs, whatever your topic is, or multiple topics. Collect all of those ideas, upvote and downvote them to get the bad ideas out of there and get the good ideas to the top. And those good ideas then can be turned into reality. The idea is to collect all the ideas, rank the best ideas, and then hopefully move the best ideas into reality within your organization.
So what do you see? I know you have clients from all different types of industries, right? What do you think is one of the bigger problems in managing this type of innovation, other than it just being all spread out? What is something that you're seeing is a common issue, when they're trying to keep track of all these ideas, communicate these ideas, make a decision on what to act on?
I think that there's two major problems that organizations are finding, especially organizations that have been around for a long time. The first problem is, do employees feel like their voice will actually ever be heard? Because in a lot of companies or large complex organizations, you're just used to the idea that no one cares about what you say unless you are, very, very senior. And so you've kind of grown jaded. And so when you're implementing a new innovation solution, whether it be ours or other processes, getting people engaged that, hey, we as an organization actually care about innovation now. We actually care about listening to you. It requires some convincing to do. That's a cultural change. Number two is a process change. definitionally innovation is new and uncomfortable, right? If it was old and comfortable, then it would be easy.
Right.
So some of the ideas that when you start innovating, again, whether you use an idea management solution or other technologies or other processes, you're going to get ideas or forms of innovation that may cut against the culture or cloth of some of the most senior people. Like somebody very senior may be like, well, we've always done it this way. And who cares what Jesse's idea to do this new manufacturing approaches? You kind of have to there has to be a level of humility at the senior levels where they understand that innovation definitionally means getting rid of something that's old or superseding it. And if that's not there, it's really difficult to innovate. And that's a really deep cultural problem that a lot of organizations try or struggle to solve.
Yeah, because I'm sure also a lot of it is baked in their known brand too. And sometimes that is seen as a risk, right? To bring something in that is new that maybe could potentially frustrate a customer or frustrate a potential key partnership. And yeah, it can be challenging. And like you said, there's the culture that's kind of built brick by brick in these larger organizations, a little more fluid in a startup. So yeah, I can see how that can be really, really tough. How do you encourage, like, because you're now the CEO of a company that manages innovation. I know you were talking about a lot of the frameworks and the decision-making that you bring to the table. Do you guys use the software as well? Do you have other techniques, or do you bring in outside voices to continue to innovate in your own company? How do you lead that innovation management?
So a great question. Yes. First, we definitely use our own software. So 90% of we use our software to develop what new engineering solutions we should have, what product ideas, and those could be our own employees, our own or customers suggesting what ideas. And it's actually really funny. So we use our own solution. There's some ideas that I've submitted as CEO that have been downvoted way below junior employees. And that's very humbling, right? Hey, people thought my idea is a bad idea, but guess what? Some of my other ideas are really good ideas. And so it's truly an idea meritocracy at Ideascale. That's number one. We use our own software. We really believe best ideas win, not whether someone speaks perfect English or how senior or how junior or what their title is. It's best ideas win, a true idea meritocracy. Number two is informational transparency. So we're big users of Slack at Ideascale, and pretty much all of the Slack channels are public. So if somebody wanted to go join the engineering Slack channel and see what the engineers are talking about, they can do that. Or if somebody wants to come join the marketing Slack channel, they can do that. So there's tremendous information transparency. Every month or so, I share, the good and the bad of how the company is doing on our monthly town hall. So people understand the underlying assumptions and data that can inform their ideas or decision-making, because a great idea is also contextual based on, where the company is, what its strategic goals are, what we have the resources to do, right? If all of our engineers are busy doing X, a new idea may be a great idea, but we just can't do it right now because all the engineers are busy. So number one, we do use our own software because we believe in it, and it's actually a really good way to get the best ideas to the top. Number two, we as an organization encourage and enable a tremendous amount of information transparency.
And it's true. I do think innovation really thrives in a space where it is really transparent and where there is meritocracy, because that's where the change happens. Because if it becomes an echo chamber of the same sorts of voices, everybody on the engineering team's only seeing the engineering team stuff, that's going to be a very different type of conversation than when you're including the marketing team and the HR team, and everybody is kind of bringing ideas to the pot. Because sometimes it's that beginner's mindset too of not being in that department. It's like, why aren't you guys doing this? And it's like, wait, actually, that's a great thing because you're not in the middle of it. It may not be feasible at this point, but that's actually not a bad suggestion. Thank you for that. That's why I love cross-departmental work. And I also think probably that's also why sometimes, again, startups can be very innovative, because they're all just they're all wearing each other's hats a lot of the time, fortunately or unfortunately. So there's not, again, those same sort of silos. So how do you bring a lot of this idea of innovation management into your personal process? Because like anything else, I do feel like innovation kind of almost starts with, there's the frameworks and there's the aspects where you're managing a lot of this decision making, but then there's also a lot of personal philosophy that comes into it as well, and how you approach leadership. I know we talked about you're already naturally curious, but is there anything that you do that focuses on that sort of your own personal process or your own creative process or your own leadership process?
Sure. So I'll give a few tactical things that I do. Number one
Yeah.
is when dealing with anybody at the company, I'm very clearly laid out here's how we make good decisions. And it's not just me. ROI is a well-established framework that's got lots of academic research behind it. So I've laid that out very clearly so everyone knows exactly the consistent framework that we should communicate around and why that's the right way to make decisions for a software company. So that's number one, like very clearly laid out how merit will be judged. And is this a good business decision? Will this create value for my customers, my employees, my shareholders in a sustainable way? Number two, I'm constantly encouraging people around the company to go take continuing education. So that ChatGPT course I mentioned earlier, I thought it was really awesome. I encourage everybody else to take it. And we also pay for employees to take continuing education because it's important that they get smarter each day, not only for their personal development, but for their professional development. And number three, when I'm thinking about things that I spend my time doing, so when I get up in the morning and think about, hey, what am I going to do either professionally or personally today? I actually apply that rigorous sort of analysis to my own decision making. Like, is this worth doing? Is this the best use of my time or not? And so I try and be consistent in my decision making behaviors. And that way I'm trying to do like the best idea or the best use of my time over the course of the day rather than just spending time on busy work, which is so easy to fall into a habit of doing.
Yeah. So do you manage your calendar in a certain way or do you have like a decision journal? I love like sometimes getting into the nitty gritty sometimes to see what people like to do because I know everybody's different, but just because of the way that you're speaking and you're talking about a lot of like these analytical decisions, I'm sure reflection is a big piece for you too. And also managing your time and resources, of course. I'm just curious.
So for time management, I'm an obsessive calendarer. My calendar goes back, I think 25 years. I think I was one of the earliest users of Google Calendar. So I have, my high school, track meets on there. Going back there, my wife and I share it. And then I've obviously combined all my calendars. So my wife's calendar, my work calendar are all connected. So I can see what all the blocks of time are. I rigorously manage my calendar, number one. Number two is I try and set aside time specifically on the calendar to make sure that I have dedicated time to just do thoughtful thinking where I won't be distracted, where I can actually just close out Slack for a little bit and go focus on the big meaty chunks of work that require dedicated intelligence or in dedicated time. Number three, like many people, I use a task manager. I prefer Asana, but there's a lot of other great ones out there like Monday.com or Jira that just help you figure out what is important, when things are due, what's high priority or not. And then finally, I don't know if it's mindfulness or meditation, but I also just make sure to take time at the beginning of each day to figure out, is this important, essential, and value creating either in my personal life or my professional life? And if it's not, it's a great opportunity to say, hey, I thought this was a good idea a few weeks ago. It's actually a terrible idea. Let's cross it off and just move on.
I think a lot of people don't give themselves that time or that permission sometimes to just say, this is not something that it's not high priority or there's not a lot of value creation that's coming here, or I'm consistently avoiding this. What is the reason? Is it because there's just resistance? Maybe there's perfectionism there. Okay, that's one problem. But if it's something that's just like, is this something that I can delegate? Is it something I can just like, what if we just fully got rid of it? Like, I think a lot of people underestimate, like if it just went away, to be honest, like there are certain things that just don't need to happen. Or I feel like a lot of people get a lot of business advice too, especially early on, where they think they need to be doing everything at once. And sometimes it can hurt you, right? It's like if it doesn't seem like it's even the right time to do that, but they're getting a lot of advice like online or from maybe the wrong mentor or whatever that might be. So how do you reflect on your decisions? I think a lot of people miss out on the reflection piece and taking those insights from that. And I know in working in innovation, that's such an important aspect personally and professionally. I'm just curious, how do you approach reflections on what's working, what's not working?
Sure. I think two things. Number one is whenever we make a decision at Ideascale, we know that there's some probability we can be wrong. So we think of everything as an experiment, right? When we're running a new marketing campaign or launching a new feature, we know, hey, we've done our research. We think this is a good idea, but our assumptions may have been wrong. Our research may have been wrong. So we always treat it as an experiment, and experiments can fail. And if it fails, no one gets fired. It was always an expected potential state of the world. And hey, this was a bad idea, in which case we just cut our losses and move on. So a bad marketing campaign, we just shut off that marketing campaign, remember why it was bad, and then just don't do it again. And that was a great learning experience for us, and we collect data. So that's number one, that we think of everything both ex ante and ex post as an experiment that could succeed or it could fail. If it succeeds, we do more of it. If it fails, we cut it and move on. Second is, in order to be reflected, you need to have collected data. And that's that's something we do very consistently at Ideascale. So whenever we're making decisions, we try and collect data both before the fact about why we think this is a good decision, as well as the actual idea itself. So if we're running a marketing campaign, how much did we spend on this marketing campaign? How many people hours did we spend on it? How much, what return did we get? How many leads did we get? We measure all of that. And then at the end of each thing, we actually look at, hey, did this work? And if it didn't, again, no harm, no foul. It was a failed experiment. We move on. And we do that in pretty much every aspect. So if we design a new feature on our product, after a few weeks of launch, if it turns out it's a feature that our customers dislike, we kill the feature. It kind of sucks that we spent some product engineering time developing it, but it's still the right decision. We know that a large portion of any decision you make in life will be a bad decision, and that's okay. You just have to manage ex ante, ex post, so that is not destructive to your overall business or life.
And a lot of these quote unquote mistakes lead to even better innovations because you tried something, you got to see why it didn't work. And then there's an opportunity that comes up where maybe you have, like you were talking about a particular feature that there was something that it was solving, but it wasn't solving it correctly. And then maybe there's something that comes into view from, again, maybe there's somebody at Ideascale that comes up with something and you're like, wait, there's the answer. Okay, we know what was wrong with this piece. Now we can build it correctly with this new idea and still solve that problem. And hopefully our customers or clients will enjoy it. What are you excited for in like the future of innovation or maybe what's coming up? I know maybe you can't talk about everything that you're working on at the company, but is there something exciting for you is there something that's coming up that is exciting for you in the innovation space?
Sure. So I think I'll say two things. One is an industry thing and one is specific to Ideascale. So for the industry, I think increasingly large organizations are realizing that innovation matters and we're not necessarily good at it. So, big companies, big government organizations are actually investing resources, realizing, hey, we need to get into the 21st century, or we need to do things that are different than we were doing 30 years ago. Because a lot of companies at this point, a lot of government agencies have been around for 100 years, and some of them have been doing kind of the same thing over the last 30, 40 years. And guess what? The world has changed a lot over the last 30 or 40 years. And I'm not just talking the internet, like basic manufacturing processes are very different today than they were in 1970. So that's number one. That a lot of organizations throughout the world are realizing they need to be innovative, B, they're bad at being innovative, and C, therefore they need to make changes in their organization. That change could be software, that could be process, that could be people, it could be money. They're making lots of changes because they realize it's important. Number two is for Ideascale. I think I'll say that there's two things that I'm able to mention. Number one, I think in about 3 weeks, we're releasing Workspaces, which is our biggest feature launch in 5 or 6 years. This allows an organization that's got many divisions or many countries to collaborate more effectively. So it allows our software to be much better for larger, more complex organizations. That's number one. And number two is we have a bunch of cool modules coming out within the next 2 to 6 months that have not been publicly unveiled yet. But as I mentioned, right now we have whiteboarding and we have idea management. There's a couple new fundamentally chunky pieces of modules that are coming out over the next 6 months. Those will be announced to the world in a few weeks from now. I can't get too much into them right now.
Well, hopefully, honestly, it might be a perfect timing just before when this comes out. It'll be a nice little juicy teaser for everything that's coming out. So what do you think if for people who are in, let's say, a company right now that's in that sort of mid-size or larger size, and they're looking for how they can lead that next innovation change? What are some moves that they can make they know that they need to do it, they know they need to take that next step. What do you suggest to them in taking those next steps, whether it's hiring, getting some software, putting together a plan? How would you encourage that strategy for somebody who is at that critical point in their business? They're beyond startup. They're ready to maybe take on, or there's a new venture that they're wanting to work on, but they need that kind of innovation management for this new pivot that they're making or a new.
I'd say there's two things that anyone who's ready to make that transition should do. Number one is find an executive sponsor that believes in this wholeheartedly, right? You need someone with some level of power and resource within the organization that says, okay, we actually care about being more innovative and I'm willing to support this effort for the next 1 year, 3 years, whatever, right? Because by the way, results are not going to appear in 3 months. They take 6 months plus, right? For an organization to really change because it's hard to change a large complex organization on a dime. So that's number one. Find an executive sponsor, work with him or her to actually say, this is actually a goal for our organization or our division within the organization. Number two, go get some software. And I'm not saying this self-servedly because, I'm a software vendor, but rather like there's something really cool and unique about software that's different than, let's say, consulting or service. And I say this next consultant. Number one, consulting is expensive. And number two, you have to go pay for somebody to do something. For software, there's two really cool things about it. Number one is a lot of software that's available just totally free, right? So I use Monday.com entirely freely in my personal life to plan with my wife. Our Ideascale software is free for organizations that are less than 100 people or teams that are less than 100 people. So you can literally go sign up for my software for free and just use it if you're working on a mid-size or small team. 100 people, by the way, is pretty big.
That's pretty big. I was going to say that's awesome. That's a really great resource.
So number one, there's a lot of software that's very affordable or very cheap, including, a lot of softwares either offer trials or perpetual small team use cases as ours do. But number two, software is very scalable. That is very different than like consulting or, hiring an innovation officer. That innovation officer, he or she only has, let's say 60 or 80 work hours in a week that they're able or willing to work. Software scales infinitely with people, right? You have 100 people, you have 1,000 people, you have 1,000,000 people. Software doesn't cost that much more to produce, and yet it can scale across your entire organization. You can work for people with different languages, different time zones, not speaking the same, not being able to write in the same language. And that scalability of software is something that's really unique and allows you to make it more structural. By the way, also, if you rely on people, if that key person leaves, your innovation process may fall apart. But if you'd instituted a good process backed by some good like hardware or software, that innovation process is much more likely to be persistent and become embedded within the DNA of your organization. So again, to recap, number one, find an executive sponsor. Number two, go get some software or hardware that makes that process tangible rather than human followable.
Absolutely agree with that. It's almost like being an architect and putting together an environment, right? You're creating almost like an innovation environment that you can design in a way, like you said, transparency. You're almost like putting open glass windows or not in certain areas. That's what I feel like the power of software provides. You're almost creating like a digital ecosystem for that. And again, like you said, you don't have to rely on people, or you can. And if you bring them in, then you can manage the knowledge that they bring at that given point. If you want to bring in a consultant, go for it. Then you can actually tangibly include them in the software and include them in the process. And then if they leave, there's not that kind of key person knowledge that's leaving. You're able to capture that and then turn those into insights. That's awesome. So I'm so excited for everything that's coming out with this. It's been amazing speaking with you. I want to wrap up with a couple of closing questions just to kind of encapsulate our conversation. So something that I ask everyone who's been on here, just because there's so many definitions, innovation, especially the term like everyday innovation. I know I have a few different definitions even myself, but I'm curious as to what yours might be or how it might show up for you in your particular experience.
Sure. I define innovation as one of two things, either doing something old better or doing something that's never been done before.
I love that. So if you're bringing it into, I know a lot of people say everyday innovation, how would that, if the everyday piece, how would you interpret that?
Sure. So you wake up every morning and make yourself a cup of coffee, right? Or you go buy one from Starbucks or your local coffee shop. I'll use really silly examples. Coffee at a typical coffee shop is nowadays cost between $4 to $10, depending on how fancy you get it. But you could go buy ground beans at your grocery store and get that cup of coffee down to 50 cents and be potentially a much better quality of coffee made exactly the way you like it, rather than the way that coffee shop makes it. So all of a sudden, you've done the old thing, which is, hey, I like coffee in the morning, but you've done it better because you've done it cheaper with higher quality beans. So that's an example in your personal life of doing something old better. You can apply that to your fitness routine. Like you do squats every day. Have you ever looked at a YouTube video on how to do squats right? Go watch a professional trainer on how they do it to get maximum benefit and minimize the risk of injury.
Yeah, it's truly one of those things that you can even take down to the atomic level. I think a lot of people think of disruptive innovation, but really a lot of innovation just comes over, like you said, better decisions over time and just taking little 1% pieces that you can add to any place in your life. And it can be more of a practice. I love that. Is there a question that you'd like to pose to our audience? I love everything to be a two-way conversation, especially now that there's comments on Spotify, which is really cool and new. And there's also comments on YouTube. There is a space where somebody responds to the newsletter. What kind of question would you pose to, it could be entrepreneurs, general audience that's listening to this, either about innovation or anything that you'd like?
Sure. So I'll ask a question really targeting towards folks at kind of mid or larger scale organizations, which is, why don't you feel your organization is compelled or feels compelled to innovate?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because it can probably bring up, maybe there's some limiting beliefs, or there's maybe some things that seem like they could be limits that may not be, and can be solved by using software, using some extra guidance from others. And maybe that is the opportunity point for them. So where can we find you? Where can people connect with you?
Sure. So the company's website is ideascale.com. And then for me personally, if you would like to reach out, I'm available on LinkedIn, Nick Jain. I respond to 100% of messages there. So very active. Alternatively, you can email me at nick.jain@ideascale.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I love your detail, and you're like, point number one, point number two, let's go. So this is incredible. I feel like for all of us out here who love structural, actionable tips, you have brought it today. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks.